to Freshly Forever, a podcast that gives you fascinating insights week after week. Here's your host, Vi Kumar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode on podcast Freshly Forever.
Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Emily Reed, another fascinating Ayurvedic practitioner and yoga proponent.
She has spent 15 years guiding busy, stressed people to find greater health, calm, joy, and freedom in their lives. She loves creating healing spaces, anything homegrown, cooking, daily doses of greenery, fresh air, and good belly laughs. It's with great joy that I welcome Emily here to podcast Freshly Forever.
Hey, Emily, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Vi. Thank you so much.
How about you tell the listeners about your journey and how Ayurveda and yoga came into your life, Emily?
Well, it was in about 2006 when I first came across Ayurveda and really experienced it for the first time. So I was already practicing yoga at this time, and I was probably practicing about twice a week. I'd actually started going to a yoga class because I was told that it would help me with my sleep. And I'd had serious bouts of insomnia and sleeplessness, and went to a yoga class, enjoyed the breathing, and knew that the next week I would go back.
This was all in England?
This was in England, yes.
Okay.
And so in December 2006, I was practicing a couple of times a week. And at this particular time, so I was working in a corporate role and I was between jobs. I'd just left one company and was due to start a new job in the new year and had 3 weeks off. And I decided I would go to India. And I'd never been to India before. I was going on my own, and I bought a Lonely Planet when we used to use those things, and did a little bit of research online. And I actually found a place where I wanted to go to, which was a place called Varkala in Kerala.
Mm-hmm.
And I connected with a yoga teacher there whose name was Ullas Kumar. He said to me that he was running these sunrise and sunset yoga classes, and that I was welcome to kind of join those practices. And if I needed help, he would also set me up with a guest house for accommodation. So I thought that felt very easeful.
So how come you chose India? I mean, what was it that prompted you to? So you just feel it was like grace that came your way?
I really believe that was so. People used to raise their eyebrows at me when I told them I just decided on my own I was going off to India, and didn't really know where I was going, but knew that I wanted to do some yoga. And that just felt like the place I needed to be and where I needed to be practicing at that particular time. And I remember when I first met Ulla, so I'd arrived in Kerala, I'd arrived in Varkala, and went to the yoga practice, and I went dutifully every day, sunrise and sunset. It was hatha yoga, very traditional hatha yoga. In the shala, in the yoga shala, it was right on the cliff top. So it was overlooking the water. So we'd have these amazing kind of sunrises and sunset experiences as we were kind of practicing. And the mats in the yoga shala were made of that traditional kind of woven like reed. And God, I can tell you, after about 3 or 4 sun salutes and going down on your hands and knees and things like that, and by the end of the class, your hands and knees were pretty kind of red and raw. But anyway, that sort of added to the experience. During these practices, or rather after these practices, especially the morning practice, I would sit outside and have chai with Ullas, and quite often it was just he and I in the session. You know, there was rarely others that would kind of join us. And at this time, I would sit and talk to him, and he would explain to me about his lineage with yoga and teaching. And he also told me that he was a 3rd generation Ayurvedic Vaidya. I kind of looked at him blankly when he first said that to me. And I really had no idea what he was talking about. I'd heard of Ayurveda, but I didn't really know what it was about. I'd heard of it through yoga. He would explain to me, and he sort of said, Ayurveda, it's about your nature, and it's about nature and creating more sukha in your life and less dukkha. So he was using these Sanskrit words, sukha meaning, as I'm sure you know, it's the easefulness, right? And a sense of ease in how you're living. And dukkha is the opposite. It's stress, tension, suffering, essentially. And as we would sort of sit in these morning sessions, I'd started to hear a little bit more about what Ayurveda was. And he'd talked to me about the 5 elements. and nature. And in Ayurveda, I know this isn't the first session for you, but Ayurveda sees all things, including us, as different combinations of 5 elements. So everything in existence, our bodies, life around us, are simply these different cocktails of earth, water, fire, air, and ethers.
Mm-hmm.
When they're balanced, these elements, and we all have a unique combination, when they're in their balanced state, then generally there's that sense of ease, of sukha. When they're not balanced, when they go out of balance, which they will do because life is always about change, then if they're not supported and helped back into balance, then dukkha, stress, tension, dis-ease starts to move in. So during these morning sessions with Ulas, I'd started to share with him a little bit of how my kind of general state of health was. And to be honest, he could probably tell. I was pretty sort of high wired. I'd shared with him about my irregular sleep. I'd also had an erratic menstrual cycle, irregular bowel movements. But, most of all, the thing that was really with me was the sense that I just felt overwhelmed a lot of the time.
So right there, he could tell your sukha, well-being aspects versus your dukkha, your discomfort areas. Correct.
Totally. I mean, Vi, you say that. He even at one point, I remember in the yoga practice, it was one afternoon, and I had this tendency as well to push myself, like to really push myself in everything, not just in yoga, but in everything. And I would overdo things. And at one point in the yoga practice, I was trying to get into an arm balance, and he just came up to me and put his hand on my shoulder, and he just said, "Don't push so much." And I remember just going, "Oh, yeah." Like it hadn't really occurred to me to try and do it differently. Anyway, yes, he really sort of had this understanding. And what I also expressed to him, which was very true to how I felt, which was I really knew this wasn't how life was supposed to be lived. Surely there was something else, and that this didn't feel like who I really was, didn't feel like me. And having said this too, I mean, I guess from the outer perspective, I was in a successful career. I was social. I was doing all the right things essentially, and that life could look very peachy from an outside perspective. But the truth was that inside it was very different. I felt very alone and afraid.
So how was it different from the yoga classes that you had experienced in the UK versus whatever else you learned when you stepped into India? I mean, did it feel different? Did it feel like, okay, it was like an eye-opening experience for you, that you were kind of exposed to a different side and you felt that there was more to yoga and Ayurveda as a science, which you got introduced to?
Yeah, I mean, good question. And certainly there was something in me that was aware that there was more here. It's a really interesting point that you've raised about how did I notice this difference? There was something certainly in the way in which yoga was taught. There's no music blaring out.
Feeling, perhaps.
Yeah, it was intuitive. And actually that's interesting you raised that, because that's exactly what happened. Because at one point while we were talking, Ulas and I, he took my wrist and he felt my pulse at that point, and I still was a bit sort of wondering what he was doing. And he'd said, this is Vata dosha. This is too much movement, too much air element blowing in your body and creating too much space
all the time, right?
Well, it was scattered and distracted, and also the nervous system, that feeling of, as you know, Vi, but for our kind of listeners, that when we talk about the element of air in the system, we're talking about something called Vata dosha, and it governs movement in terms of anything to do with movement in the body, heartbeat, breathing. But it's the movement, the nerve system responses. When there's too much of it, it kind of shakes or rattles the nervous system, and we get more fidgety, agitated, distracted, and that moves us into a place of dis-ease, of instability, insecurity. Air is very light. It has no solidarity, no grounding to it. It's hard to ground. So at this point, Ulas had actually suggested I take some Ayurvedic treatment. And I trusted him enough by then. I said, well, yeah, sure, I'll come and take some treatment. And, he said, this way you're going to feel more sukha, more of this kind of ease. As part of this treatment, if any of you out there have ever had Ayurvedic treatments, you'll be aware that it most of the time involves a lot of oil being applied to the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for this is that what they're doing is the lubricant of oil is actually countering the effects of air element in the system. Okay. And air, like the wind when it's blowing outside, will dry things. That's why we put our clothes outside to dry in the breeze. But the air will kind of dry parts of the body. You know, we can start to feel more achy, get more pain in the system, get more bloating and things like that. And so oil is just really helpful. So I had a kind of application of oil. I had these two lovely girls that were there. And I remember lying on the table, and it was one of those traditional tables, you know, with neem wood, not the most comfortable of things, but it's so that all this oil can sort of be massaged into the body. I just remember lying there, and I just sort of started to cry, tears of gratitude, because I really felt like I was in the right space, but also praying for clear direction, because I knew I didn't want to go back to what I was doing before. And I felt somehow at some level that Ayurveda had perhaps the keys to something that I was looking for. And I still wasn't clear what that was. But as I said, I knew I just didn't want to keep doing what I had been doing. At that time, I guess, having had that experience in India, that was, I guess it was a profound kind of awakening for me in that way, to realize that this was something I needed to explore more. And you know, one of the other things that I also really remember Ulas saying to me, which is something that Myra, who is my main kind of mentor and Ayurveda teacher today, that's something that she reiterated to me when I met her in 2015 in India. Ulas had said, you know, these disturbances, this dukkha, this stress, this tension, this instability, this dis-ease, he said, it's not you. It's not the real you. It's the disturbance. And it's not your natural state. And when he said that to me, I remember feeling immense relief. I think I probably cried again at that point, you know. But it really was.
Because you knew that you could get better, and that, you know, it didn't have to be the norm, right?
Right. And that I felt I'd been seen for who I really was, and not for just the conditions or the stuff that I'm carrying, you know. And actually this is also so at Hale Pule, and something that we really work with our clients on, as you will well know, Vi, we really encourage people when they come to us with things like painful menstruation, I've got bloating, I've got IBS, I've got constipation, my this, my that. We really help them reframe it in using the words the constipation, the IBS, you know, the amenorrhea. These are ways in which we create just a little less attachment to these conditions. And they almost through language help us realize that they're not the natural way in which we are.
Yeah, I agree. Verbiage is so important. And actually, I'm going to get to that. But before that, do you think this feeling all over the place, you know, this air element getting predominant and taking people into a discomfort or a dukkha or a disease state even, occurs a lot with high achievers? Because people tend to be, I'm not trying to say all over the place, but then I guess wanting to do everything, you know, like wanting to be more successful, you know, like even with your own personal example, do you think probably that success and wanting to, you know, just be, you know, the best in everything tends to make us feel like, hey, okay, you know, not being jack of all trades, but still, you know, like, hey, I want to do this right. I also want to do this right. I want to do this right. So is that a reason that even throws people off in the first place? And that right there is a red flag or a signal that, hey, you know, you just need more grounding. You know, you just can't be in the air, right?
Yeah, wow, there's a lot in that, Vi. Great question. You know, what I heard from what you said was, it was flagging for me this desire for perfection, right? For
exactly
winning and getting it perfect. That is that desire, that tendency is where we immediately start creating more of this dukkha, right? This stress, this tension within ourselves and in the space around us, right? When we're seeking perfection, it's not only impacting us, it's impacting those around us too. We're believing that we can control this situation and everyone in it. One of the things I often say to people, you know, when we have that tendency and we notice that it comes up for us, like, oh, I realize I'm really trying to do this perfectly. You know, I want to look perfect. I want this work to be perfect. I want the house to look perfect, whatever it is. that we just pause and we actually just say hello to the to that perfectionist. And sometimes in Ayurveda, so there is a quality in us which is called Pitta dosha, an element, and it's made up of the elements of fire and a little bit of water, and it has a great biological function in our body, and it's what regulates heat, because it's the fire element, and it's also regulating transformation, and that's to do with our digestive processes and how we are digesting not just food but thoughts. And that quality of the fire, right, in our minds, it's what gives us that ability to focus, because there's a kind of sharp quality to focus. It allows us to be quite analytical, but it also allows us, it's often said, that Pitta element in us, we're able to kind of to lead, to sort of see the path ahead, and that natural fire in us is what drives us to want to achieve things. It's a healthy quality in its measured space, right? And sometimes when we are that Pitta gets too high, maybe it's an environment that we're used to being in, a very competitive environment, and that tends to have an impact in how we are kind of approaching things. But yeah, when we see that kind of quality, that desire to kind of overachieve, and to make things perfect, then it's really helpful to say, I see you, I see what you're doing, and to have a little smile at that desire to make it, to push, and that pushing quality, that quality of Pitta dosha that can do that, but our desire to push things really will take us to the edge and over if we're not careful.
So is that an exaggerated Pitta more than an exaggerated Vata, or can that throw Vata off as well? And is that what leads to us being more, say, sort of spacey and all over the place?
The Vata qualities, when this movement quality, this air and ether in the body, when it gets excessive, okay, it starts to overdo things. So in our minds, what we do is we start overcommitting, overscheduling ourselves, okay, thinking we can be in many places at once, okay. What happens is we end up feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, okay, because that Vata quality, and when we've got a lot of Vata in our nature naturally, it will tire more easily. And so often with Vata, what you'll notice is you'll go, but then there will be a drop point where it gets exhausted. When there's more Pitta involved, the fire will push, and it will push, and it will push, and it will push you right to the edge and over. It doesn't tire in the same way as the Vata. And so that's how we get a burnout. And burnout, you can burn, fire, we could denote to being some of that kind of fiery characteristic that is associated with Pitta dosha. Yeah, I think this is one of the amazing things about Ayurveda, is that it really helps us to observe our tendencies and to look at, is this particular mindset, activity, action, is it taking me towards a place of balance or away from it? Vata dosha, in its balanced state in our body, it's regulating movement really well, okay? So it circulates things, it helps things breathe, heartbeat, as I said, and it will help with that elimination process. It's what moves the waste out of the body. In the mind, that air and ether element is what gives us inspiration, all right? It's light, it's able to see the broader perspective on things, it's visionary, and it's able to tune into the subtleties. There's subtler elements than that of kind of earth and water. And it's also what allows us to adapt. So remember, air and ethers, it has no fixed shape. And this is one of the things that often in Ayurveda we say, well, Vata dosha, beware of Vata dosha. And because we're living a kind of Vata existence, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that is in a moment, but we also need to take the positive qualities of what Vata give, which is being able to adapt to change. And that, as we get older, this is something we're facing day in, day out. We're all aging. If we can really keep that Vata in its balanced state, it allows us to move through shifts and changes in our lives, in our environment, so that we can flow with grace and ease, right? And have more of the sukha, less of the dukkha, the stress and tension.
Gosh, I mean, we have actually, transitioned so nicely into these elements. And it's so interesting you pointed about this very important aspect of burnout that so many people are facing in the modern world, right? So, from your journey and how your teacher, instructor, practitioner in Kerala kind of opened your eyes and ears into what this wonderful and magical science can bring. It's just so fascinating that, you have transitioned into, even explaining and throwing more light on what this air and fire element can do. And it's very interesting you said, how you as a health counselor, when you do your consults with your clients, you don't attach importance to the condition and you just, prefer to word it differently and stuff. And so I completely agree in terms of verbiage, it's so important. And offline, like I have shared quite a bit with you about my own health journey and my own condition. And a lot of times on my very difficult days, I would have to look myself in the mirror. And I've said this so many times on this show in ever so many discussions. I would just go take a look at myself in the mirror and throw a big smile. And the next minute, you won't believe how much energy it gives me when I think, I would just totally not be in a state where I could go fix myself a meal, I would just go and cook for the family. So it would just be, and a lot of times every day, like in my own life, I do not even like to use the word STRESSED. I just only, even if I have to, I only spell it out. And the same goes for DEPRESSED. Those are off limits in my verbiage. So I think right from your daily life, one's daily life, I think if you attach importance to, it's not being sentimental. Some people may choose to call it that, but I don't believe in that. I feel like the more positive you sound, I think internally, the more positive you feel, and externally, the more vibrant you feel, right? So I think it's just fascinating.
Yes, you've touched on so much there, and absolutely.
People may think we are crazy, right, doing that to ourselves, but it's just magical. That's what I have said that so many times on this show. I just hope it inspires many to tweak their life and change and live for the better.
Right. And this is it. I mean, that's looking at yourself and remembering that we are holistic beings, right? And Ayurveda is absolutely seeing us in those components as body, physical body, of mind, and of spirit, right? Of energy. And you see, we can shift how we feel faster than we can snap our fingers, because emotions are just energy. And emotions that get stuck, so when we start to feel repeatedly anxious or angry or whatever it is, this is when energy has gotten stuck somewhere. And Ayurveda and yoga, that kind of more esoteric side of things, are teaching us how to manage our energy more effectively so that we can live a more sustainable, a more wholesome, holistic life and experience ourselves as whole beings. And so you are pretty familiar with, I think, by Halepule, we have these practices called the intuitive energy practices, the IEPs.
Yeah, the podcast has it all, the Halepule podcast. I've seen that, yes.
Yeah. And again, these are just simple ways in which we can shift an energetic block, the symptom of which is an emotion that we're dealing with, an uncomfortable emotion. We have to remember that we are not just physical body, and we're not just our mind and the contents of our mind. We're also an aspect of spirit. If you think of it like this, we're all channels, okay? And we're all channels, and through this channel that we are, through this body and mind, we're bringing in consciousness, or prana, we would say in yoga, which is the life force. Really, our duty each day is to tend to this channel, to do what we can to keep that prana just steadily flowing through us. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, I guess we kind of want all things to continually, steadily flow, right? We don't want things to move too fast, and we don't want things to move too slow. We don't want our bowels to be kind of too fast. We don't want our heart rate to be too fast. We don't want either things to get stuck or to get blocked. And so looking at how we can kind of tend to that channel is one of the best ways in which we can manage our energy more effectively. And that's really what yoga and Ayurveda are teaching us, these skills for energy management.
That's just phenomenal how you have emphasized here as to how their sister sciences, Ayurveda and yoga. This discussion, Emily, really, I wanted to tap into your expertise on why women in the modern world face so much of health issues. Like there's so much of women's problem, like hormonal, menstrual, all that, surfacing, all the teenage girls facing so much of menstrual pain and things like that, right? So what are common modern day issues that are leading to this and that results in these conditions, manifesting in the first place? And from an Ayurvedic perspective, what is it that you would say? Why are these conditions occurring in the first place? And how do we go about managing or treating them and, saying goodbye to those for good?
Well, yeah. Many of the conditions for women today, and actually for everyone, that have come to be known as normal, right? I can't tell you how many women we've seen at Halle Poulet who will come, and myself included, having painful periods, irregular menstrual cycles, experiencing unpleasant menopause symptoms, PCOS, all of these things, which they've basically been told or seem to think that this is normal and they need to just live with this. This is how it is.
As women, we are supposed to live in pain, right?
Yes, said a man. No, I don't. But no, it's yes, these are things that can be termed as normal. But one thing, they may be common today, but that does not mean that they are natural. That this is naturally how we should be feeling, how we should be experiencing our menstrual cycles, the menopause, and so forth. Actually, if on this topic, and I'll just, as I've named some of those particular conditions, we see a lot of women for, and that are going to be discussed in a wonderful free online event that we called Flow with the Feminine.
Nice.
We're really looking at the root cause of these issues for women and simple solutions from the Ayurvedic perspective. I guess if we're looking at what the kind of solutions are to all of these things, it's actually the same from an Ayurvedic perspective, the same solution for all of it. So I've talked about the 5 elements just briefly, about how the 5 elements make up our being. And these are the same 5 elements that exist in nature. So from an Ayurvedic perspective, we are part of our natural environment, not separate from it. So we are made up of the same stuff that the plants and the trees and the land and the ocean and the sky are all made up of. Our body, as nature does, works in cycles and rhythms. Okay, and we know this, and it's come to be known as circadian rhythm in the kind of the wellness health industry. And when we honor those cycles, when we are in tune, in rhythm with those cycles, then we generally feel more easeful. And what I mean is simple things like we want to be sleeping at night when it's dark, and we want to be up in the daytime. Our bodies, you see, are highly, as we know, you and I both know, and I'm sure many of the listeners, they're highly intelligent, capable instruments. And they're designed with such amazing intelligence. For some reason, our minds kind of get in the way, and we start to believe that we can override these natural rhythms and cycles that they have. We have a desire to push to get the project done and stay up all hours of the night. Okay. But repeatedly do that and stay up late working on a screen and skip lunch because there isn't time for it, or because we want to diet in some way, or all of these things. Our bodies need the rhythms, and when we kind of push them so that we don't give them enough rest, we end up using stimulants so that we can make up for the fact that we don't have enough rest. We eat late at night. We don't get enough fresh foods with good prana in them. We don't get enough natural light. Maybe we're eating foods that are difficult to digest, highly processed foods and things like that. This is all going to create or pave the way for disturbance, in the body. Living out of these rhythms is what sort of starts to create this void. It starts to create a kind of a gap, and into that space is where this kind of dis-ease starts to move. I mean, simple things like I often talk about, the seasons, one of the, seasonal foods. We don't listen to seasonal rhythms in the same way. We have an abundance of choice in our supermarkets. And, we can have anything at any time of year from anywhere in the world, pretty much. I know that I can buy strawberries in the middle of January. Strawberries are a summer fruit in my supermarket.
Probably the strawberry has traveled several thousand miles before it has got to your supermarket.
Right, exactly. And there are certain qualities that the summer fruits will have that serve us in summertime, in a summer rhythm and temperatures. We need different things in the winter, slightly different foods.
Back in a moment with our guest on Fresh Leaf Forever.
Living out of rhythms is one of the things that paves the way for this dis-ease to move in. And the other thing that really, and really, as I said, the other thing that causes these disturbances is, Myra often refers to, is insults to Agni. Okay, Agni in Ayurveda, as you know, is the term given for digestion. Agni, it is said in the Ayurvedic scriptures, it supports health in all beings. It is that digestive intelligence that is not just about how we're digesting food. It's about how we're digesting thoughts, emotions, experiences, and life.
So it's digestive fire, correct?
Yeah, it's the digestive fire. And it's literally, you can think of it like a fire. You want to tend to a fire, you give it some fuel, some wood, let it burn, you leave it alone. And then you go back and you give it some more fuel. Okay. So ideally in kind of Ayurveda, and certainly our approach through Hale Pule is that we recommend, 3 meals a day, minimum 4 hours apart. Your lunch meal would be a slightly more complex meal, slightly more heartier meal. Your breakfast and your dinner's lighter meals, effectively, just a little bit lighter. The Agni is also like the sun in the sky, because like the sun in the morning, our ability to digest, it's weaker. Okay, it's had the night, it's had a long period of fast through the night, and then it builds and it grows, and at midday it gets kind of more
intense,
more powerful. Yeah. And then in the evening, it starts to wane again. But you see, because typical patterns, especially when we're, working in offices and wherever, is to a lot of the time skip breakfast, have a lunch, something small for lunch, and then go home and have a big dinner in the evening. And so, and then you kind of up for a bit, probably on your screen, and then go to bed. And so this isn't a helpful way to support the digestive health from an Ayurvedic perspective. It's really, if we can learn to kind of look after the fire, and that's really what Ayurveda gives us good guidance on, then we can start to support our immune health and bring ourselves into a better state of being and become more of the human beings that we are, rather than the human doings.
Actually, it's very interesting. You said few things there that, really were like great nuggets for me. When we talked about those strawberries, eating out of season and bringing it from elsewhere, with it traveling several thousand miles, or that being grown in a greenhouse, whatever it may be, like kind of deviating away from the norm and conditions that normally, are like outside. You're kind of diminishing the life force or the prana associated with that food, right? That's like a great nugget that I derived from what you said there. Eating big meals at dinner, you beautifully said, you recommend eating 3 meals a day, and then the digestive fire tends to go up, like rather slowly builds, and then it starts waning. The thing being, why do you want to add more fire logs to the fire when it's actually burning nice, right? You don't want to overdo things. So why just add more and more food within that 4-hour window that you kind of mentioned? So there's no need to necessarily overload oneself, but instead eat proper, fresh food at the appropriate time. That's just fascinating, based on whatever you said. So that's what I derive from the past few minutes of our conversation. And I really hope, listeners can just get what you said there and then kind of incorporate it in their daily lives in terms of honoring our circadian rhythm and then eating when really the body can do its job well. When you're out and about and moving, probably it's easier for the body to process it rather than when you're going resting late in the evening and at night.
Right.
Feeding
and
big meat, right?
Exactly. And then, sleep is never as good. If you've eaten and then people just go to bed or they go to bed an hour later, you want a minimum of 2 hours really, but you're better off, really having dinner between 5 and 7, that last meal. And obviously you've got to kind of think about, how do I want to feel? Okay. Do I want a good night's sleep? Even though if I know it's nice to eat with partners or something like that, or, family and things, but sometimes you could eat a little bit earlier yourself. You can still sit at the table with them. And if they don't want to eat earlier and be with them whilst they're having their food. With the Ayurveda, again, it's looking to make certain choices. And again, I come back to this thing of, is this taking me towards a place of balance or away from it? And, a simple thing like just eating a bit earlier and having 3 meals a day. You don't have to have a big breakfast. If you're used to skipping breakfast, just try and have a piece of fruit, make some wholesome, nice baked goods, which are all on our website at halepule.com. Yeah. And again, it's true. And just coming back to that point on eating out of season and having these foods, and we're all certainly going to be doing these things, but it's about awareness and where we can just really trying to stay with what is seasonal, what is fresh, ideally organic, and local. If you need to choose between organic, but it's come from abroad, and local, then, look at where the most prana is, right? You can tell that by looking at foods. Does something look fresh? Does it look like it's got vitality in it? So, yeah, and it's really helpful to go to farmers markets and things like that to get your produce from, because they will typically have more seasonal foods. But the other thing is, when this thing with the mind, when we feel like we can have whatever we want at any time because we have so much choice, we have no sense of rhythm. This is how we easily start to move out of listening to our own rhythms. In Ayurveda, we talk about 3 causes of disease, okay? And one of them is this disregard for nature's rhythms. But there's also a disregard for the body's rhythms, right? So not honoring when you need to go to the toilet, for example, not honoring when you need to go and sleep, not honoring hunger, not honoring thirst. Simple things like not honoring a yawn, keeping your mouth closed, but really trying to hide it because we feel it's not appropriate to yawn. You can always cover your mouth, but their expressions, it's the body's trying to do something at that particular point, even moving gas out of the body.
Yeah, that's just so much of a, social barrier, right?
Right. You've got to pick your times and places, but you need to help that gas come out of the body, because when it stays in the body, it's the same with the yawn, we're pushing an energy that's trying to come out back in, and that creates a disturbance. And when you do it one off or, whatever, that's fine. But when we're living like that perpetually, I saw someone not so long ago for a consultation, and they really had a problem using public toilets when they were out. And so often they would be out all day and they wouldn't go to the toilet because they didn't want to use the public facility. Or a facility that wasn't of their home. This particular person was having symptoms as a result of that. It was a lady, so especially that downward movement action, these are things that need to happen. And one of the other things they talk about as a part of the disease process in Ayurveda is the overuse of the senses. And I think this brings us on to that subject you were talking about overuse of screens.
I mean, that's something, talked about sleep, and I was going to touch upon that and ask you, people, we all make this mistake of staying on our devices, right? How is that tying back to our discussion on hormonal health? How is it impacting on overall and specifically women when it comes to hormonal health? And what about all these things that teenagers face, right? Acne and things like that.
Overuse of screens is an overuse of our sense faculty. Okay. And our senses, what we feed our five senses with, is directly impacting the state of our mind. And the state of our mind is having an effect on how we are digesting. And how we are digesting affects the natural rhythms of the body, our hormonal rhythms. Okay. So when we're perpetually in a space where we're using the screen, whilst we can't see it with our physical eye, creates a flicker, right? We don't see it, but it is there. We're engaging, we're interacting, whether we're on Zoom or we're reading something or watching something. And this movement is triggering Vata dosha in the mind, right? It's the air and ethers elements which control movement. And so our nervous system is getting stimulation and it starts to trigger an overstimulation. This is what will begin to disturb. It's like the wind, if you think about it, like Vata dosha is like the wind across the surface of water. It makes everything go choppy, okay, so that nothing is really clear. And it's very hard to see clearly what really lies beneath the surface of the water because everything looks a bit distorted, right? Shapes look bigger than they actually are and all sorts. And so the Vata will impact the body systems. Agni is getting weak. The hormonal cycles get impacted and they can't do their duty, okay, because so much of what supports the endocrine system comes from the nourishment and the condition of our digestive tract. Okay. And if we're not processing and assimilating our foods properly because the Agni is impaired, then it will impact other parts of the body. Now, let's just be clear, a one-off, that's one thing. Okay. But as I said, it's a continual habit of doing this. And over time, that's what starts to pave the way to these issues.
So a constant use can cause or lead to a dysregulated nervous system.
Right.
In turn, can cause other disturbances. Naturally, Agni or the digestive fire can get impacted. And then everything, they say like 80% of our immune system resides in our gut, right? So the digestive system is going to have an impact on whatever is going on in the body. And you're saying that leads to or impacts hormonal health, correct?
Right.
So if what we put in our body matters so much, then enough of these processed foods and say wrong snacking, is that what is leading or causing all these acne and other problems that we normally see with teenage girls and even teenage boys or anyone for that matter?
Agni is at the root of all of this, okay, the state of Agni. And that's really where we go with Ayurveda, is that we're looking to see what the condition of Agni is and to support your digestion so that it can help really break down and assimilate the food that we're taking and use the kind of the essence of the food to nourish the body and then choose what's going to nourish the body. This is what Agni does. It's an intelligence. It chooses what will build, support, help things grow, and it will remove the things that aren't needed, right? So if Agni is impaired, and the kind of things that will disrupt it, absolutely, like we said, screens, for example, eating on the go, not chewing food properly, erratic eating patterns, eating foods that are hard to digest. So in Ayurveda, we talk about some of the incompatible food combinations. And yes, it will directly affect the condition of the intestine. And then the intestine starts to accumulate more of what we call kind of which is a kind of a toxin or ama. And that toxin will sit in the digestive tract and eventually it will start to move out. If that kind of habit is repeated, it will start to move out into the blood supply. It will get circulated around the body and it will find a place that is weak and it will move into that area. So for some people, it could be the skin. Other people, it might be lower back or joint pain and so forth.
So what then happens when it comes to, say, defining or rather setting boundaries for how much is too much? Say an occasional prolonged screen use is okay, but then for someone thinking, hey, okay, I've just been doing it this past month, like you are even now able to set limits on your devices, right? It reminds you as to how much
Right.
screen time you have had and so on and so forth. So how much is too much? People seem to push that envelope, right? That threshold with everything. They're thinking, hey, I'm all right today, so I'll continue to do that. After all, I've been doing it this past couple of years. So why not? I'll just try it for some more time. So I guess, where do we draw the boundaries, Emily? How much is too much? When it comes to devices and all the damage that we are doing with wrong eating and all of that. So if you just throw light on that.
Yeah, how much is too much? Our minds are so crafty because we'll just sort of say, but it's okay. Oh, you slept fine last night. You could just stay up a little, half an hour more. It'll be all right. You could just have this. Oh, that extra coffee now, it will give you a bit of energy. You'll be fine. You'll sleep all right tonight, knowing that you've had issues sleeping. And really, we have to kind of join dots. And that's what we're doing in Ayurveda. We've got to really see what is cause and what is effect, how one action is having an impact on how we're feeling, and learning to listen to that each day. And one thing can quickly become two things, can quickly become three things. And before you know it, you're starting to feel symptoms and you kind of realize you've gone like way off track. And it's hard to come back to where you actually were. One of the main things is to just be aware of what your habits are, set a few parameters around them. So maybe just say to yourself, and this is something I really recommend to people, is to switch off, at least an hour before bed, 2 hours before bed. If you've got sleep problems, switch off from your screen, do something like sit and pause and take, 12 conscious breaths. If 12 conscious breaths feels too much, take 6 conscious breaths. Have a bath, rub a little oil into the soles of your feet. Maybe just settle yourself rather than kind of being so plugged in. So with Agni, this is the thing. Agni in its biological process, it has a discerning function, okay? Mm-hmm. So it chooses from the food that we're eating. It's saying, is this nutrient? Will this benefit body, or does it need to be removed? So it's literally looking at everything that we're doing in this way.
Kind of almost like at a granular level.
Yeah, right. Okay. And that's happening in the digestion and in the cellular level. And that's also when the Agni is balanced, it has that capacity to give us that clear discerning function. What is helpful? What is taking me towards balance? What is not going to be helpful? And when the Agni is impaired, right? Late nights, some junk food, or just food that hasn't kind of gone down so well. Maybe we've overeaten a bit, whatever it might be. We haven't slept so well. These are all things that can kind of weaken Agni or put it into a weaker state. Then our discerning function in our mind is slightly off. And that's how we quickly say, oh yeah, but I'll just have that, whether it's an extra shot of coffee or something, because that will be fine and it'll help me. When actually it kind of adds to the load and it starts to take us further away from that place of balance. And the mind starts to think, oh yeah, but then this, and what about this? And so we really want to be listening and be aware of how we're feeling at any given time, and to think about what is taking me towards, what is taking me away from this place of balance. One of the other things we often hear in discussions about the masculine and feminine energies in us in society. We've all got masculine and feminine energy in us, all beings. And the masculine energy in us is a really helpful quality. It's what gives us that feeling to strive for accomplishment, reasoning, structural kind of focus, logical, linear thought processes, and honing in and being able to focus on isolated areas. And this is what we would kind of call a kind of more masculine quality. But when that masculine quality is taken too much and at the expense of what we call more feminine qualities, which are mostly about kind of organic growth and seeing things holistically, and the feminine kind of energy in all of us, men and women, is about intuition and about cycles and the appreciation for the subtlety in life. And when we kind of disregard that side of us, and especially as women, because we're kind of, if we're in careers or whatever we're doing, that the way in which we get ahead is to achieve and to win and to work in that particular way, then we also kind of limit our capacity to be in our full state of health. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I can just derive totally the understanding that the masculine and the feminine side to any individual is what is bringing about that homeostasis or the balance, right? So if that's what you're trying to say, so it's important to not disregard, and especially as female, disregarding female side of things, like probably starts to throw everything off right from the hormonal side of everything, right? And if you can reflect on the essential tips for modern living, I know you're a great proponent of 4 essential pillars of living, right? The clean air, water, eating fresh, living in a positive environment. I guess we have talked about all of that already, but if you can just focus on that, Emily, in your own words, as essential tips for modern living and how they tie back again in terms of helping girls thrive and in warding off hormonal issues, because I see that digestion is the biggest component when it comes to even all these period menstrual related problems. And you reflected on the workshop that's coming up even with Hale Pule. So that's a free resource for people to take advantage of. But I guess I'll let you talk more about the 4 essential pillars.
Well, yeah, sure. One of the things to really help regulate our body systems is creating regular routine. So what does this look like? Regular meals, we've talked about that. Regular times for getting up and going to sleep. Our body and our mind thrives on routine. One of the most significant things for me when I started to take in some Ayurvedic principles was actually getting up before 6 a.m., just before 6 a.m. And in Ayurveda, we see that certain times of day have certain elements more prevalent in them. And getting up just before 6 is waking up in the time when the air and ethers are more obvious, let's say. When we arise at that time, the vata, which is the air and ethers in our body, can start to move, and we are more able to have maybe a bowel movement first thing. The mind tends to feel a little bit more awake. If we were to sleep kind of past 6 a.m. and we get up around 7 or 8, then we're waking up in a time of day where there's more of this earth water component, which is it's kapha dosha, a heavier time, and the body's system starts to feel more heavy. So we may feel it's more difficult to get up at that particular time. And so the system gets more slow. So for me, I noticed that one of the great things with my energy and regulating my energy was to do that, was to get up just a little bit earlier, but equally to go to bed a little bit earlier, around 9 p.m., 9:30. That really set me up for a kind of, and do that regularly, that set me up for a much better sleeping pattern, along with things like, as I've talked about, looking after your Agni, looking after your digestion. 3 things that I started with when I first started to take on some Ayurvedic principles that were working to support my Agni, my digestion, really taking me on my first few steps towards that more balanced state of health, which is what I was looking for at the time and still today. Scraping my tongue first. So every morning I would go and look at the tongue, and you can do this too. Just notice if you probably will find there's a little bit of coating there. And that coating is just a symbol that there's a little bit of undigested food matter that's come up from the gut in the night, and it's grown kind of like a bacteria on the tongue. So you can use a tongue scraper, and it's just a gentle scrape. We say about 7 times from back to front. This just helps clear some of that gunk on the tongue. You can then swish your mouth with a little bit of oil, and typically some nice organic plain sesame oil. Not toasted, but plain sesame, which will help with lubricating the teeth and the gums. It's adding some moisture also into the nerve tissue around the jaw. Often if we feel quite stressed and tense, then there can be that jaw clenching that goes on. So this can be a nice thing to help with that. It will also help improve the suppleness of the skin and lubrication. Then just to kind of wash the face, to kind of clean the senses, like cool water on the face. Cool water in the eyes. And, typically we have a practice in Ayurveda of using some oil in the nose just to help lubricate the sense pathway of the nose. And you can do the same thing in the ears as well. Yeah, just one other thing was to sip half a cup of warm water first thing to help flush the system. And that will help with hydration, but also just to get things moving. That can be a nice thing to begin to integrate. Other things are, definitely each day you want to think about being able to get out to nature, or even if you live in the middle of a city, get somewhere green, go and see a tree, stand by it, touch the bark, notice the leaves. If it's a seasonal change for you right now, look at the colors of the leaves turning or the buds growing, depending on which part of the world you're in. Move your body every day. Whether yoga asana, it could be just a simple sun salute or holding some down dog, but breathing into your body and allowing yourself just to open up the channels to allow for prana, life force, to move through. Switch off from the screen, as I said, at least an hour before bed, 2 hours if you have sleep issues. Practice a pause each day, even just stopping. You could be standing up, but ideal if you sit down. Close your eyes and take up to 12 what we call conscious breaths, just being really aware of that inhale and exhale coming in and out of the body. If 12 is too much, do 6. If 6 is too much, do 3. But practice the pausing, just for a moment, pausing whilst the flurry of your day is kind of whirling around you. And it will help. Whilst you collect more and more of these pockets of pauses, it starts to help your nervous system just get quiet before you then move off into the next thing. And it will also help you feel more centered as well, more focused. And one of the other really important things is to smile and giggle at yourself. Just like you said, Vi, about smiling at yourself in the mirror. That smile really has a capacity to shift energy, heavy energy. And it really does change and help change our outlook. So life can feel very serious at times, can't it? And especially even sometimes when we're looking to improve our health in a certain way or do things right and get things perfect. And, when we try and do things perfectly, everything stops being enjoyable. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we have emphasized enough on eating fresh and living in a positive environment, surround ourselves with positive people and even use positive language, right? So, yeah. And what else? All those are like great tips. And I guess a conjunction of all these things happening reasonably, routinely can help better health and living, right? Rather than pushing the envelope, like we said, on doing more out of context or out of norm things or things that can push us to a discomfort state. I think doing at least, some of this on a very routine basis can help enhance our well-being is what I have derived from this beautiful conversation, Emily.
It's been a pleasure. You can have a look at the Halepule website, halepule.com. It is a platform that seeks to guide all beings to restore natural balance through yoga and Ayurveda. It is a school as well as offering healing services. But if you are interested to find ways to support your digestion, to learn more about Agni from that Ayurvedic perspective, you can have a look at our program Agni Therapy, which is a 3-week digestive reset. And it really gives you all the tools and education that you need to really begin this journey to improving your health. Finally, Vi, I just wanted to, I thought it might be, it just came to mind, but I wanted to share that after that experience in Kerala back in 2006, one of the first books that I bought was a book called Prakriti by Dr. Robert Svoboda. An interesting Robert was, I think, the first non-Indian that qualified as an Ayurvedic Vaidya in India back in the 70s. In his opening pages of this book, Prakriti, he wrote something that spoke to me in a very profound way about Ayurveda. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate that, if I may. He said, Ayurveda is meant for all beings who, by harmonizing themselves, seek to act as harmonizing forces in the universe. Ayurveda is about awakening your inner healer. It's about restoring balance in your life, and it's allowing love, creativity, compassion, the true essence of you, flow with ease and grace into all that you do.
How nice. I think that sums it up beautifully. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think that's okay.
As far as Emily Reed as Ayurvedic health counselor, I know you are based off of Europe. So
Yeah, I am. I'm based in the UK. I have an online meditation community, and we meet 3 times a week, 7 till 7:20 a.m. BST, so that's British summertime. The main component of my Ayurvedic work is all through Hale Pule. It is a super platform, and really with a wonderful mission at hand. So it's an honor to be part of it.
awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. And we look forward to many more enlightening chats in the future. Thanks so much for taking time to talk to us today.
Pleasure, Vi. Pleasure.
Listeners, as always, follow the podcast, rate the podcast, and leave a review from your podcast app of choice.
Thanks so much for tuning in week after week. Follow me on Instagram at YP Kumar and for the podcast at Fresh Leaf Forever for constant updates. I will see you back again next week with yet another guest and yet another interesting topic. Until then, it's Vi saying so long.